All right. Now, most of you know, I hope all of you know, we've just come off a very wonderful time of the year known as Easter. I don't know if anybody that going by anybody and you forgot about it, but many of you were here. We had an absolute wonderful time because we still actually celebrated the greatest single defining moment that changed not only the course of history, but actually has changed so many individuals' lives all over the world. And that's this thing we call Easter, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the culmination of Jesus' 33 years here on the earth. That was an incredible time, and his resurrection both validated his identity, his purpose, his message. He said he came to be a savior of the world, but it was his resurrection that was going to put the exclamation point and say, if I'm not raised from the dead, you can just scrap the whole thing. And I say to you right now, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, the Apostle Paul said that. He said, we're of all people to be most pitied. People ought to feel sorry for us if Jesus didn't rise from the dead. If he did rise from the dead, I feel sorry for anybody who's not following the living God, because he said this is what proves it. So I would say to you, if you have any difficult time with this, just check historically. We know that he lived, we know that he died, we know that his grave got emptied out, and nobody is alive today that said I actually saw it firsthand. You figure out where he went. You know, if you can figure it out, go wherever you figure it out. You know, but if he said as a reputable person, a person that so many people say he's a good person, well, good people don't usually lie. You know, well, he's just a wonderful man. Well, wonderful men don't usually, make up a myth to follow. So if we're going to go that deal, and he said he was going to rise from the dead, and he said, I'm telling you beforehand so you can check it out. So, check it out. And if you check it out, and you really become convinced he has risen from the dead, I have no reason to know why you wouldn't want to follow somebody who actually could conquer death. That's an in for me. So I just had to put a little commercial in there. All right, but, all right. I love thinking people. Somebody else said, you got to really think. Well, it was thinking that brought me to Christ. I go, come on, help me here. But here's the deal. In reality, celebrating Easter is like beginning at the end of the story of Jesus. This was actually, for all practical purposes, the end of the life and times of Jesus on earth, which is kind of like starting a movie at the end. You ever done that? Some of these movies, that the way they start is they start actually at the conclusion of the movie. They do this very, very intentionally. They show you how the movie ends. And so when that happens and you're watching a movie like that and it starts to the conclusion, what do? You go, I'm not even going to watch this. I already know how it's going to end. Why do I want to watch the movie? I already know how it's going to end. You know what it does? It intrigues you to know how the story unfolded, how it unpacked that actually got you to the end. And that's actually an art form that they used. So as we thought about here, what we wanted to do for the next Sundays after Easter, we had discussions. What are we going to do after Easter? What are we going to do after Easter? We thought, well, why don't we go back and look at some of the storyline? Why don't we go back and look about a little bit of what brought Jesus up to that point of Easter? And because our conclusion was if we go back and we understand a little bit more about Jesus, then it'll give us a lot more confidence to move forward, a lot more conviction that we can move forward. So being as creative as we are, we thought let's do a 4-week series, and we're just going to call it After Easter. How about that? How about that? So there we go. We're just going to be doing for 4 weeks after Easter, but what our goal is to understand a little bit more about the Jesus of Easter to see kind of where he came from and what was going on. Now here's the deal. People's understanding of Jesus is really all over the map. I mean, you just try talking to people or looking online. I mean, it's just really all over the map. And a lot of it comes from things like the culture you were raised in, comes from the family you were raised in, and even your personal bents and your personal preferences. See, I grew up in the days of Mr. Rogers and Captain Kangaroo. Cool people, all right? Cool guys. And Mr. Sweater, Mr. Rogers, Captain Kangaroo. And so that was kind of like Jesus was. And whenever I was present, he was just kind of like Mr. Rogers, sweet, likable guy. And in Sunday school, he was always this good-looking guy with kind of long, well-groomed, flowing hair. He had a thin, handsome face. He had milky white skin. And a lot of times he was carrying a lamb, okay? So that was the Jesus that I actually grew up in growing up. And now if you're from another culture, Jesus might look black, or Jesus might look Hispanic, or Jesus might look Asian. Now, the truth is he was Middle Eastern, so I really feel he probably looked kind of Middle Easternish, okay? And that's because that's the culture that he was out of. We also have a tendency to shape Jesus according to our own leanings, because for most of us, or for many of you, you know that Jesus is a Democrat, or maybe Jesus is a Republican. Some of you are just convinced he's a libertarian, okay? because we just kind of tend to make Jesus into our leanings. If you check in a bookstore, you check online, you can find Jesus portrayed as a political revolutionary. In fact, Castro, during the height of the revolution, there was a picture around of Jesus with a carbine slung over his shoulder. Because Jesus was the revolutionary, okay? So you can see that. You can find Jesus as a magician. He's sometimes presented as this peasant Jewish cynic. For my generation, he was presented as a hippie. Even the leader of a sacred mushroom cult. That was Jesus. Just kind of make him however we want him to be. I've read about this stuff over the years, but Dan Evans, who some of you recognize his name, he was a pro linesman for the Miami Dolphins during their heydays, back in those days. Remember the Miami Dolphins of 72, undefeated season, 17-0. Anyway, he ended up writing a book. And his book was called On God's Squad. He was a Christ follower. And here's something that he said. I love this. Here he said, I guarantee you, Christ would be the toughest guy who ever played this game. If he were alive today, I would picture a 6'6", 200-pound defensive tackle who would always make the big plays and would be hard to keep out of the backfield for offensive linemen like myself. That's how he pictured Jesus, because he was a football player, so Jesus must be this tough, big 260-pound, 6'6", defensive lineman. I have a book on my shelf at my office. It's called Jesus, CEO. Because if you're in the business, you kind of want to picture him kind of as a businessman. So what we tend to do is to make Jesus into our own image. Instead of it says God created us, and somebody once said that God created man in his own image, and then man returned the favor and did the same to God. Just kind of created him in his own image. And we have a real tendency to do this. Now, I grew up in a particular family that honored and respected and followed Jesus. I very much appreciate this. And it had that bent was passed on to me, at least that bent. If you grew up in a family that was generally anti-Jesus, I have no question that's affected you. Just like my background affected me. And so I understand when I talk to students and other people that have a hard time with Jesus, usually I find the same thing going on in their home. That's just the way they grew up, it's just the way they heard, that's just the way it was talked about. But here's the good news. The good news is that we're just not left to our imagination when it comes to Jesus, because he's not some comic book superhero that we can just create into whatever he wants to be. He's actually a very real historical figure, as real as Abraham Lincoln or George Washington or Napoleon or Caesar. Okay? Very real historical figure. So we got to be a little bit careful there. And the first 4 books of the New Testament are actually dedicated to the life and times of Jesus. So you've got to know there were 4 books in the first four books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that were actually dedicated to that. Most of the guys that were there were actually eyewitnesses of what Jesus said. So if you want to really get some feeling of that, you ought to read that. Oftentimes I've thought if people could just get a better understanding of the Jesus of the Bible, if they could just get a better understanding of that could almost call this series Jesus in his own words. Because I just want to have us hear Jesus in his own words. When I read about that, and I read about when I read Jesus in there, I go, man, if people ever really understood him, they'd probably really like him. In fact, they might just absolutely love this guy if they could get the picture that is shown to us from the New Testament. So in our series, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using those Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we're going to use primarily the Gospel of John. John has more of the recorded words of Jesus than any other. If you're a red letter person, you get more red letters in the book of John than any other one. In fact, I want to encourage you to read it. Okay, it's only got 21 chapters. We're going to be on this series for a month. Just take your time and wander through the Gospel of John and read about it, because it's going to help you. It's going to help to shape your understanding of Jesus. Now, I've got to say, to be honest, we're going to spend 4 weeks in this series, so of course it's going to be limited. It's going to be limited. There's going to be aspects we're not going to be able to look at in 4 weeks. There's, hundreds of thousands of books written on this topic. Just like me, if you were to look here, if you would look at me, and I'd say, describe me, you would give me a description. If I said, here, look at me. If I said, here, look at me. If I said, here, look at me. Every one of your description would be different, but it'd be about the same person. If you talked about me here, you said, the poor guy has no eyes. Well, that'd be honest. Because in your view, that's exactly what it was. So you got to understand that we're not going to be able to hit everything, but what we really want to do is hit some of the things that I honestly think are the most misunderstood about Jesus. This is really important. The most misunderstood things is what we're really going to be tackling. So we're going to start with one this morning And it's actually kind of an unusual picture. I don't know if any of you have ever heard this taught on before. I'm not even sure I've even taught on it before, even though I've loved this idea for many, many years, because it's a very, very, very significant picture of Jesus. And for those of you Bible scholars who said, I want meat, you're at the right place this morning. We're talking meat, okay? Okay? Might even throw in some other things with that meat. All right, here we go. After 30 years of Jesus' silence that came right after his birth, the silence is about to be broken. The silence is about to be broken. It comes right out of John chapter 2, second chapter of John. And one of his first public appearances is in this series in this city called Cana. And so I want to do, even looking at this, do what we're doing in this whole series. I want to start at the end of this story. Start at the end of this story. It comes out of John chapter 2. Let's read verse 11. Putting it up on the screen. It comes out of the New International Version. If you have an NIV, you're welcome to follow along. And here's what it says in verse 11. This is the first of his miraculous signs Jesus performed in Cana of Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. This occasion we're going to look at is the occasion of the very, very first miracle that Jesus had. And it was a powerful miracle because it says it revealed something about him. It says it revealed his glory. Now, I oftentimes when I read in the Bible, when I'm reading like a paragraph or two, I look at the end of that paragraph and I see what it says and I go, wow, this really gives some credibility to everything above it. When this says this was the first sign that Jesus was going to do, and it really revealed his glory, I'm going, I want to see this, by golly. I want to pay a little bit more attention to what this is all about. Now, if you were a candidate for a political office, or if you were an entrepreneur who's about to launch a new brand, if you were a musician who was kind of releasing your first, major recording, you'd pick your first public venue with enormous care. Enormous care. Each detail would be controlled because you want to make sure that people would understand who you are and what you're about. You read about this and people are going to make an announcement for political office. They're very careful about what environment they do this in because it's very important that people understand this. So what is it that Jesus is going to pick for his first venue to make sure his message gets across, to make sure that his purpose is understood? It would get out there and actually place him on the map, on the place he wants to be placed on the map. What in the world is this first miraculous sign that showed his glory? I didn't write that. The scriptures say this was his first miraculous sign, and it demonstrated the glory of God. So just think in your mind, what we are about to read is going to demonstrate the glory of God. All right? There's our setup. All right, let's start reading in verse 1. John chapter 2. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Okay? So here we are, we're at a wedding, and in the ancient traditional cultures, the purposes of a wedding was not simply just about the happiness of two individuals, and that wasn't true, but that isn't all that it was about. It was about the binding together of families. It was about the binding together of communities together for generations to come. You read this throughout history, by the way. The stronger and the bigger the families were in a town, the better the economy would be in the town, the better the military security would be, and everyone in that town would flourish. So this was a very important thing. It wasn't just about two people getting together to live happily ever after. It wasn't quite that selfish, if you will. It was about something much bigger than just themselves, which, by the way, I would say, again, any of you that are thinking about marriage, please keep that in mind. It isn't just about two people. There's a lot of other people that you're putting together, and that's very, very critical. That's for another time. That will come the talk part 2. Okay. So these weddings were these big public feasts that were for the entire community. They would frequently last for at least a week, and they were not only that, but they were probably the biggest event in the personal lives of the bride and the groom. So it was a very, very big deal. And it's in this context that something unthinkable happens. A few days into this big celebration, the wine runs out. And since wine was the single most important element in this ancient feast, All these ancient feasts, wine played a huge part. Okay? Essentially, the party was over. The party was over. A social and psychological catastrophe, especially in an honor and shame kind of culture. This is the kind of thing that the family and the bride and the groom would probably never live down for the rest of their lives. All right, so let's keep reading. Go down to verse 6. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing. They were religious, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you've saved the best till now." I just wanted to read that because I'm about to make a statement here. For his big coming out, Jesus chooses to turn water into wine to demonstrate his glory. You with me? Okay. Now, we're not serving wine afterwards. It just, but I just want to, you got to get this. And he did lots of it. It said every one of these things contained from 20 to 30 gallons. That means Jesus made between 120 and 150 gallons of wine. That's about 700 bottles of wine. So he's not being chintzy, okay? We're talking mammoth amounts of wine that Jesus is making. And it's not the cheap stuff. Not the cheap stuff. It's not your 7-Eleven brand. It's not Boone's Farm. I mean, he didn't do any of this stuff. It says that he actually created 700 bottles of the best wine. Now, some may have a problem with this, okay? But I'm just reading the story. All right, I didn't write it here. No blind person gets their sight back. No dead person gets brought back to life. No storm is stopped. No hungry people get fed. The first thing Jesus does is make lots of wine. Some of you are ready for us to close in prayer right now. All right. Now, I know there's all kinds of very deep theological and symbolistic things that can be mined out of this passage. I've been around long enough and read enough books. And we're going to look at just one of these, by the way, before we close at the very end this morning. But I don't want you to get lost in all the sauce of the symbolism and just miss the obvious, because this is so critical to a right understanding of Jesus. I can't say this strongly enough, and I think it's one that many, many, many of us, even as Christ followers, don't understand. In a nutshell, here's the deal. Jesus wanted to keep the party going. Got that? Jesus wanted to keep the party going. He wanted to make sure that people were going to be able to continue to enjoy themselves, and that families and reputations wouldn't get damaged or wouldn't get tarnished. Now, I know this doesn't sound real religious for a lot of us, but that's the real Jesus that so many times gets missed. So often he's portrayed as this stuffed shirt that's got so much starch in his collar, as the most offensive thing for him would be to actually find somebody enjoying themselves. Can't do that, actually having a good time. No, you can't really talk about Jesus and a good time in the same sentence. They don't go together. It's like if there's anything enjoyable going on, it must not be spiritual. It just must not be spiritual. So if you're going to follow Jesus, you may as well just follow kiss the good times goodbye, just grin and bear it, because that's what being a Christ follower is all about. And if that's how you've pictured Jesus in your life, I don't blame you for a nanosecond for not wanting to get on board. What person would want to get on board with that unless you're some sadistic character? Who wants to get on board with something like that? And unfortunately, the church, and unfortunately, Christians, and unfortunately, even people like me, and possibly even people like you, have done a lot to foster this image. Later in the Gospel of John, Jesus makes one of the clearest statements so we can make sure and get this one right. All right? And I know many of you have heard it, but I want you to hear it in this context. In John chapter 10 and verse 10, here's what Jesus says. He says, I have come that they may have life and may have it to the full. I've come that people might have life and might have it to the full. I want them to have a full, enjoyable life, one that has purpose, one that's significant, one that's meaningful, one that's fulfilled. That's why here at the Crossings, we have a very simple mission statement, and it's right across the top of your bulletin every single week. Our goal is to be connecting the reality of God to the reality of life. I hope we put that there every week. I don't know how many of you have actually registered that. Connecting the reality of God to the reality of life, which simply means our understanding of Jesus is that he wants us to both love him and love life at the same time. And the challenge is always to figure out how that blend works. Family is key. Recreation is critical. Health is important. Employment is essential. These are all parts of the reality of life. And we want to enjoy and embrace every single one of them. But in order for that to happen in a way that things don't get all cockeyed and cattywampus. You know what that word is, cattywampus? Okay, it just means kind of crooked. Okay, I used that growing up. Actually looked it up. It's still a word. All right. In order to keep that from happening, the reality of God has got to get into the mix. If you leave the reality of God out of the mix of the reality of life, it gets all craziness. It gets all cockeyed and upside down. So the org chart that God uses to make sure that we're going to be able to make this work is very, very simple. Jesus said it on several occasions. I'm going to read what he said out of Mark chapter 12, verse 30 and 31. Here's what Jesus said. Here's the deal. It's really simple. Just love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Then love your neighbor as yourself. That's the org chart. Come on, let's get things right here. Kind of get God right, kind of get him in the right perspective. Get God in his right position. You know what an org chart is in an organization? It's how things flow down. If you start with you at the top, everything's going to flow down. It's going to get very, very cockeyed. If you start with the reality of God at the top and it flows down, it changes everything from marriages to work to family to all kinds of stuff. All right. Now, sometimes I hear people say, Okay, if Jesus wants us to have this great life, then what's with all the rules? What's with all the do's and don'ts? What's with all the thou shalt and thou shalt nots? So if I get a little ballistic on this one, just kind of give me a little bit of grace, because I've heard this for so long. It's one of these things that drives me so crazy, but I'm going to just try to be relatively calm and address this, okay? I did say relatively. All right. There are rules for everything. Hello? You tracking with me? The rules for life, there's rules on everything. Not to take away joy, but to protect and ensure joy. Okay? Think about this. I'm going to give you a couple examples. So every year, NFL owners after the season get together, and you know one of the things they do? They consider rule changes. This just happened a couple weeks ago. And many of the rule changes have to do with protecting the safety of the players, right? That's what they do. There's rules about hitting the quarterback, how you can do the horse collaring, headbutting, leading with a tackle. What is the idea of this? To ruin the game? No. So the game can be enjoyed and safety at the same time. Every sport has these kind of things because they want to be able to have fun and limit injuries. We know this, fun and limit injuries. There's rules for the road. In this country, you drive on the right side, okay? If you go to another country, go on every side they tell you to do. But in this country, we drive on the right side. There's all kinds of rules about right-of-ways for turning. There's speeds in neighborhoods, school zones, speeds on the open highway. Why is that? So driving can be beneficial, a useful experience that limits injuries and limits hurting. There are rules for air transportation. There are rules for airports. We know all this. There's building codes for construction, as annoying as they can be. And I know this. As annoying as they can be sometimes, whenever a building collapses, and especially there's injury or loss of life, the question always is, who violated the codes? Who violated the rules. Then there are lawsuits to prosecute those violators because the breaking of the rules resulted in a tremendous amount of pain and loss of joy. We get this. We get this. Whenever you buy an electronic device, I mean, there's so many of them out there now, it comes with this massive instruction book, or a lot of times you can get online and why do they do this? To limit you, to make sure you don't enjoy your device? No. So you can get the most enjoyment out of your purchase. If you don't know how it works, you're going to screw it up and you're not going to be able, how come this doesn't work? And then that's when you call your kids. How do you make this work, And you know how that goes because who wants to read instructions when you got kids, So they're there to help you. Then they give me the talk. Here's how you do it, okay? And then I forget it and I have to call them back again. This is how it goes. We have no problem with this. So when it comes to life, the most precious and complex organism on the planet, it only makes sense that it comes with manufacturer's instructions. They're the ones, whenever you buy a device, whether, whatever company you buy it from, they're the ones that issue the manufacturer's guidelines on how to make this thing work. They know they made the crazy thing, so they know how to do it. So when it comes to life, how can we think we can do it? We need to have a manufacturer's instruction guides because it gets very, very complicated. And the truth is, we do realize this. We do realize this, but what we do is we use knockoff instructions, knockoff manuals. We don't go back to the manufacturer. We listen to what somebody else has kind of made up as far as how to do this kind of stuff. So when it comes to how to manage your money, we check with Visa, the TV commercials. I'll tell them what to do with my money, by golly. So glad they're there. They're there to make money off of me, but good. Thank you for all the help, Visa, to tell me about my interest charges and all this kind of stuff, okay? When it comes to our understanding of sex and marriage and child raising, we go, well, I'll check a few knockoff manuals here. That sitcom on TV, that was really good, Or that movie or somebody's latest and greatest book, or how about your buddies at the office? They really got the inside scoop on this. Let's find out how they fixed a damaged marriage. They ought to really be good at this. I've already gone through 2 or 3 of them. So I think I'll get my ideas from them. When it comes to resolving conflict in any kind of relationship, which is huge to the quality of life, so many times we just go with our gut. Oh, that felt good. Yeah. It really feels good in the moment when you tell off your boss. Next week isn't too good when you don't get a paycheck. So we use all these knockoff things, and God says, time out. Wait a minute. I made life. I know how it works. I don't want the party to stop. I don't want it to stop. So I've told you how to interface the reality of God with the reality of your own life so that it'll work. That's why I've told you, not to suck any joy out of you, but to give joy to you. Now, let me just want to say something here for a moment that may be very, very painful to admit. But I think what I'm about to say, most of us know that it's true. Most, certainly not all, but most of the pain that many of us have experienced in our lives, many of the things that have happened in our lives that have stopped the party going, are the direct result of either you or someone else violating the manufacturer's instructions, i.e., God. That's where most of them come from. Busted marriages, damaged relationships, financial meltdowns. God says, I want the party to keep going. I don't want it to stop. That's who I am. So work with me on this one, will you? Here's what Jesus actually said at the end of some instructions about certain things in John chapter 15, just a few chapters later, John 15, verse 11. Here's what he says. I have told you these things so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be made full. Why do you think I spend so much time telling you these things? So that your joy can be full, so the party can keep going, so it won't stop. That, by the way, is why we're doing something like the talk. Almost as goofy as it sounds, let me tell you, God has some very important things to understand about this that could actually save your kids from a ton of pain and a ton of grief. And I don't think they're going to get it from the guy and the gal at school. You need to apprise yourself of some of this. It could be the thing that could save your kids' lives. Okay? Now, because all this gets a little bit tricky to figure out, here's what often happens. I know this from personal experience. Here's what often happens. People begin to think, I'm going to have to either pick the reality of life or the reality of God, because I just can't make them fit. It's going to have to be an or. And God says, no, I want it to be an and. It is an and, but it's an or. How does it work? Well, let me just say it again. It starts with the reality of God, and then you use the reality of God as a template over the reality of life, and then it keeps the party going. I just want you to think of this. This is very, very important. See, from time to time, here's what happens in my position as a pastor. You might imagine this. I have people coming to me wanting me to make rules and taking stands on all kinds of things for us as a church. Okay? I get this. Maybe it has to do with the consumption of adult beverages. Maybe it has to do with certain things you take into your body, even tobacco use. Maybe it comes with having to do with an approved list of movies that it's okay for us to watch in this church. Maybe it comes with can you kind of set some acceptable amounts of how much we should spend on our cars and our vacations and on our houses? How about on Christmas? Oh, and what about the Easter Bunny? You got to stop this Easter Bunny stuff, okay? Because we don't want people believing in the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. And you got to take a stand on Halloween, by golly, that wicked old holiday. You know, please stand up here and take a stand on Halloween. And I don't make these kind of rules, quite honestly. We don't make them as a church because the Bible doesn't make them. The Bible doesn't make these, and you got to know from where I sit. Some of you wonder, won't even go there. From where I sit, there's been people that have left this church because we will not take a stand on some of those things. Okay? Kind of weird. Where did it happen to that person? Well, they won't, never mind. Okay. Now, I want you to hear me on something. This is really, really important. I can't tell you how important this is. The goal. Put that up on the screen if you will. I want you to read this. The goal is to engage in the reality of God in a way that fills your life with a kind of joy and peace that keeps the party going. Let me read this again because this is so critical. The goal is to engage the reality of God in a way that fills your life with a kind of joy and peace that keeps the party going. And checklists of rules don't do that, because they're dead and they're lifeless and they're formed without substance. They don't accomplish that. Homes and cars and recreation and food and drink and entertainment and health and kids and education are all parts of the reality of life. Embrace them. All parts of the reality of life. And you, not me, and not this church, are the ones who are going to have to manage the balance between that and make sure that you're engaging the and. Because if you don't engage with the and, you'll get all consumed with the pursuit of the party and forget all about the reality of God. And when that happens, the party comes to an end. That's one of the most important statements I've made to you this whole morning. I don't want you to miss this. God wants us to embrace that. But when you become so consumed, and it's only about the pursuing of the party, and we forget about the overlay of the reality of God, it sucks the life right out of the party. It sucks life right out of your life. Now, let me just take a little bit of a risk here, and I'm going to say some things, and if the shoe fit, wears it, and if not, kick it to the side. There's a good chance that some of you are watching things on screens, whether it's television or film or on your computer, that are making it very dangerously hard for your marriage. You want the church to make some kind of statement about it? No. You know. You know. And the reality of God says to guard your heart, because if you don't, these things are going to ruin the party for you. You don't need a rule on that one. The reality of God says, keep watch over your heart with all diligence. Don't let these things sneak into your heart. Shut that screen, turn it off, get help if you need to. Some of you may be consuming alcoholic beverages to the degree that it's affecting your judgment. And God speaks loud and clear on this. He speaks loud and clear about drunkenness because it will ruin the party for you. And quite frankly, you just need to knock it off. And some of you need to get help, and some of you are getting help. And my hat's off to you. I say, way to go. Way to go. Because you realize that it's sucking the life out of the party for you. Not because the church made some rule on it. Not because the Bible made some rule on it. It made a rule that said, don't get drunk. That's where it drew the line. Some of you are spending so much money on your homes and on your cars and on your vacations that you're up to your ears in debt. And you have no money to invest in the things that God is crazy in love about. And it's sucking the joy right out of your life. I hear so many, well, I wish I could help. I really want to. I go, why can't you? Because I'm up to here. Some of you need to get help on this. That's why we do financial peace. We do financial peace because if you don't get a handle on that, it's going to suck the party life right out of you. So you got to be able to get a hold on this. Some of you are damaging your health through the incessant intake of things into your body. And it's going to end the party for you. It's going to hurt the party. People say, oh, you're talking about tobacco? Oh, I hope you'd say something about smoke. I'm not saying a thing about smoking any more than I say a thing about eating Big Macs. Okay? They're both going to put you in the grave. Okay? So I don't know why we have to have this line of what we're going to, hey, I don't like this one. It's really our personal preferences and our personal bents and our culture and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not saying do any of this. Please don't say, oh, I like it raw. You can drink all the wine you want, just smoke all you want, eat all the Big Macs you want. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying this is on you. You got to connect the reality of God to the reality of life, and don't let the pursuit of the party consume you to the point that it's sucking the life right out of you. Sports, recreation, football, soccer, dance, baseball. These are all wonderful things in life, wonderful realities of life. But when they become what controls your time and controls your money and controls your thought and controls your schedule and controls your family, you are dangerously close to missing the reality of God in the org chart that He set up. He said, you love the Lord your God first with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And if you miss that org chart, you'll do greater damage to your family that will last you longer than you can ever imagine. My heart breaks when I see some kids that get older and their parents are so heartbroken because they say, well, my kids just don't really love the church and do this. I said, well, what did you do? Well, they never could go to church because of soccer and baseball and dance and gymnastics, all this kind of, and you're wondering why now they don't think it's important? It's because we told them loud and clear it wasn't important. Everything else is more important in life. We go, oh, but it hurts so bad. Can you help me? No, I can't. No, I can't. God's org chart, you don't mess with it because it sucks life out of the party. So can you be smart on this one? Okay? This isn't I'm not correcting you. I got to deal with these things in my own life. I just want to put it out there. Be smart on this one. Doing these things doesn't make God love you any less. That's what we kind of have in our little, oh, if you do that, God doesn't love you. That's not the issue. It's ruining the party for you. It's ruining life for you. The life that God has for you. It's taken let me read you one verse. Oh my gosh. Maybe I'll end here. No symbolism this morning. I wanted to go into something, but I'm not going to do it because I want you to hear this verse out of Nehemiah. The book of Nehemiah, there was a bunch of people, this is in the Old Testament, a bunch of people that were going back to rebuild Israel after it had been destroyed, rebuild Jerusalem. And they were working their tails off, and they sacrificed a lot, and they worked really hard. And so Nehemiah just said, time out here, we got to take a break. And they threw a big party. And here's what Nehemiah said in Nehemiah chapter 8 and verse 10. I'm going to end with this. It says, go, this is what he's telling the people, go and enjoy choice food and sweet drinks. Go, enjoy it. And then he says, and send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is sacred to our Lord. Don't grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. Now, I love this. He said, go ahead and enjoy it. But the reality of life, enjoy it. But the reality of God says there's hurting people out there that can need some of it too. So what I want you to do is, as you're enjoying it, send some to those who have nothing prepared. Send some to those that don't have any money. Help the other people out. That's the reality of God. And when you combine those two together, it says the joy of the Lord is your strength. You can experience a kind of joy in your life that isn't all about me, party, 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 party. It's a much bigger picture. So I want us to get this. I really want us to get this. I really had a bunch of other things I wanted to talk about on this, but I'm just going to kind of bring it to an end. Jesus said this, I came to give you life, and I came to give it to you to the full. So please understand this. The calling card of his very first miracle was to set everybody laughing in a way that said, as the Savior of the world, I want everybody to understand that I'm crazy in love with them. And I want to keep the party going in their lives so they can experience the life that I have for them. But this really goaded the religious establishment of the day. They just couldn't take this. And on a human level, it's actually what led to the cross. On the human level, they had to get rid of him because the leaders didn't want to relinquish their control that they enjoyed through mandating rituals and through mandating dogmas and through putting out checklists. And if Jesus had gone along with that, they wouldn't have had a problem with it at all. It would have been fine. And for some of you, this is the only way you've ever seen Jesus, and that just grieves me. It's the only way I've ever seen Jesus. It's the only Jesus that you've ever known. And it's just not all that attractive. And can I say to you, I'm so sorry. Because you're missing out on the party. Those of us at the church are responsible. And if that has kept you away from the Jesus that is so crazy in love with you, I want you to change that. That needs to change in your life. There needs to change in your life because you're missing connecting with the one that can bring the greatest joy in your life. And by the way, one of the things I was going to talk about, and I'm just going to mention it here, don't think that life is full of all kinds of joyful things. It's hard. What happens with most of us is we're dependent on outward things, whether it's religion or church environments, or whether it's relationships, or whether it's finances, whatever it is, we're depending on that to give us the joy in our life. And you know what? Every one of those are changeable. Every one has changed for many of us. And when that changes, takes the air out of things. But Jesus says, no, I'll never leave you, forsake you. I'm going to put something inside of you. I'm going to put my spirit inside of you. When you become a follower of me. And it's going to be a constant source of joy, even in the midst of all kinds of crud going on the outside of you. Because if you're dependent on the outside, you're going down. You got to have something on the inside. And Jesus said, that is why I came to this earth. That's why I died on the cross, because I wanted to remove that separation between God and humanity. I had to get rid of that sin. And so he went to a cross for you. Not so he could put you in church, and not so he could make you a religious person. He went to the cross for you so he could give you an opportunity to get rid of that barrier that stands between you and God. So you could come into a real, vital, honest relationship with him and begin to walk in the joy of a real God who lives in your life 24/7. And that's what we want for you more than anything else in this world. Because it'll make the greatest difference in your life. Now right now, band, why don't you come up here? Right now what we're going to close off our morning with communion. Up here, when we have these little emblems, they're called, or little things of juice and bread, nothing magic in those. Those are representations of how much God thinks about you, of how valuable he thinks you are. That he went to the ultimate to buy back you and I who've gotten so far from him. He went to a cross to do this. And as we take this, I want you to just take this. Jesus, when he set this up, he said, I want you to do this in remembrance of me. I want you to do this to remember me, not as a church ritual. There was no church when he actually set this up. They were just some guys that were around him. He said, I want you to do this to remember me, because as soon as you forget me, you're just going to get lost in the sauce of life. He said, but I want you to do this in remembrance of me. So as the band plays here in just a minute, you're going to have an opportunity to just come up these center aisles and then walk around the side. You don't have to all get up at one time. You have plenty of time. You have 5 or 10 minutes to do this. You don't have to come up at 1 minute. You may want to sit there. But let me just say this to you. If your only understanding of Jesus is this rule Jesus, this no fun Jesus, this suck all the life out of you kind of Jesus, puts you in a chair, make sure you never have any fun in life, change that this morning. Just where you're sitting, just say, thank you, Jesus. I never got this before. And right now this morning, I want to ask you to come into my life. And I want to ask you to forgive me. And I want to have your Spirit, because that's what the Bible says. His Spirit comes and lives right inside of us. I want to have that juice, so to speak, in me that's going to walk me through life. You sit there in your chair and you just make that choice this morning. And then you come up and take communion for the very first time as a true follower of Jesus Christ. Not as some religious ritual. Because I'm sorry, all the religious rituals in the world can't give you the joy of God. Only Jesus Christ can. Only Jesus Christ can. So I'm going to pray, and then the band's going to play, and you just feel you can come up anytime during this song.